The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. Street lights flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows along the narrow alley where an old man pushed a cart overflowing with discarded bottles and scraps of cardboard. His frail hands, calloused from years of labor, trembled slightly as he adjusted the weight. Each step forward was an effort, but he endured, as he always had. Mr. Lang had spent the past 20 years living like this, waking before dawn, scouring the streets for anything salvageable, and selling what little he could to buy rice and vegetables. It was a meager existence, but he had never once complained. Because for him there had been someone, who made every hardship worth enduring. Leo. The boy had come into his life on a stormy night 2 decades ago. Mr. Lang still remembered it vividly, the distant sound of thunder rolling through the streets, the soft whimpering that led him to an abandoned basket near a pile of garbage. Wrapped in nothing but a thin, dirty cloth, the infant's tiny fists flailed against the cold. His cries were weak, but persistent, as if he were already fighting against fate. No one had come for him. So Mr. Lang did. People had called him a fool for taking in a child when he could barely feed himself. But he had never seen it that way. He raised Leo with love, teaching him everything he knew about the world. How to be kind even when life was cruel. How to find joy in the simplest things. How to endure. And Leo, bright-eyed, curious, full of questions, had been the light in Mr. Lang's weary world. He had gone to school with second-hand books and shoes too big for his feet, but he never complained. He was smart, determined. Mr. Lang had known, even from an early age, that Leo was destined for more than the streets they called home. So he sacrificed everything for him. On the days when there was only enough money for one meal, Leo ate while Mr. Lang went hungry. When Leo needed a school uniform, Mr. Lang worked through sickness to afford it. And when Leo had received a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city, Mr. Lang had cried, not from sadness but from pride. His son, his boy, was going to have a future far beyond the alleyways and scrap yards. But lately something had changed. Leo no longer came home as often. When he did, he barely spoke, always distracted by something. His phone, his new friends, the life he was building without Mr. Lang. It was a slow shift, like the receding tide, barely noticeable at first. A missed dinner here, a hurried goodbye there. Then longer absences. Shorter conversations. Distance where there had once been warmth. Mr. Lang told himself it was natural. Leo was growing up, finding his own way. That was what he had always wanted for him, wasn't it? Still, a quiet fear settled deep in his bones, one he didn't dare name. Tonight, as he pushed his cart toward home, he saw the glow of lights in the tiny shack at the edge of the city. For a brief moment, relief flooded him. Leo was home. He quickened his pace, ignoring the ache in his joints, eager to see his son. Inside, Leo was sitting at the small wooden table, his posture stiff, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He wasn't dressed in the usual worn-out clothes Mr. Lang had saved for him. Instead, he wore a crisp white shirt, the fabric smooth and foreign against the dim surroundings. Mr. Lang set down his sack, brushing the dust from his hands. "You're back early tonight," he said, a hopeful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Leo didn't meet his eyes. Something was wrong. A silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Leo cleared his throat. "Dad, we need to talk." There was a weight in his voice that made Mr. Lang's heart tighten. He pulled out a chair and sat across from his son. "Of course, my boy. What is it?" Leo exhaled slowly, as if rehearsing the words in his head before saying them out loud. "I've been thinking about my future." Mr. Lang nodded. "And you should. You've worked so hard. You have a bright path ahead of you." A pause. "I can't stay here anymore." The words landed heavily, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a river. "I want a different life," Leo continued, his voice controlled, almost rehearsed. "One where I don't have to struggle like this. Where I don't have to explain where I come from." Mr. Lang's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Explain? He echoed, though he already knew. I've met people who can help me. But they wouldn't understand my life here. They wouldn't understand you. The old man swallowed the lump forming in his throat. You mean they wouldn't approve of me? Leo's silence was answer enough. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mr. Lang stared at the boy he had raised, the boy he had loved more than anything in this world, and searched for the child who had once clung to him with small, trusting hands. The child who had once laughed at silly bedtime stories and cried into his chest when he scraped his knee. But that boy was gone. In his place was a man who had outgrown the life Mr. Lang had given him. The old man forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. If this is what you must do, my son, then go. Leo looked up, startled. You're not mad. How could I be? Mr. Lang's voice was gentle, even as something inside him broke. I always wanted you to have a better life. If leaving here is what you need, then I won't stop you. Leo hesitated. For a fleeting second there was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, of guilt. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. He stood up. I'll come visit, he said, but the words felt empty, spoken only to soften the moment. Mr. Lang nodded. Be well, my son. Leo picked up his bag and walked to the door. For a brief second, he hesitated. But he didn't turn around. And then, he was gone. Mr. Lang sat there long after the door had closed, staring at the empty chair across from him. The flickering candlelight cast shadows against the walls, making the small shack feel even smaller, even lonelier. Outside, the wind howled softly through the cracks, carrying with it the echoes of laughter from a boy who no longer called this place home. The days stretched into weeks, then months. The small shack at the edge of the city, once filled with quiet laughter and the scent of warm meals, stood hollow and still. Mr. Lang sat alone most nights, staring at the empty chair across from him, where Leo used to sit, legs swinging as he listened to stories about the world beyond their little home. Now there was only silence. He told himself he had no right to feel abandoned. This was what he had worked for, wasn't it? For Leo to have a better life, a future beyond the cracked pavement and dim streetlights that had been their world. And yet, no matter how many times he repeated this, a dull ache settled deep in his chest, a quiet, persistent sorrow that refused to fade. Leo had promised to visit. But days turned to weeks, then to months, and the door never opened. The city swallowed him whole, and with it, the last traces of the boy Mr. Lang had raised. At first, he had tried to reach out. He called from the public phone down the street, dialing the number Leo had given him. The first few times, Leo answered, his voice polite but distant, as if he were speaking to a stranger rather than the man who had once cradled him through fevered nights. Then, the calls went unanswered. Still, Mr. Lang waited. He told himself Leo was simply busy, that life had a way of pulling people in different directions. He told himself this until, one evening, he saw the truth written in cruel, unspoken words. The city was far, but not unreachable. A kind neighbor had offered to pay his fare, insisting he visit Leo, even if just for a moment. Mr. Lang hesitated, but the thought of seeing his son, of knowing he was well, was too strong to resist. The journey was long, the bus rattling along uneven roads, carrying him into a world he did not belong to. The city loomed ahead, bright, restless, filled with towering buildings that swallowed the sky. It was a different world, one where people moved with purpose, eyes fixed forward, never lingering. He clutched a small cloth bundle in his lap. Inside was Leo's favorite meal, carefully wrapped, made with hands that had known nothing but love for the boy who had once called him father. By the time he reached the office building Leo had mentioned in their last conversation, the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden streaks across the towering glass windows. He stared up at the name etched into the entrance, polished, important. Leo worked here. His boy had truly made something of himself. His steps were slow as he approached the entrance. The doors were sleek, automatic, opening and closing as people in expensive suits walked in and out, never looking twice at the old man standing just beyond the threshold. Taking a breath, he stepped inside. The air was cool, perfumed with something unfamiliar. The floor gleamed beneath his worn shoes, his reflection distorted in the shine. He approached the front desk hesitantly, offering a smile to the young woman seated behind it. "I'm looking for my son," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "Leo. He works here." The woman glanced at him, her expression unreadable as her eyes flickered over his tattered clothes, the weathered lines of his face. She hesitated before tapping at her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" Mr. Lang frowned slightly. "No, He lifted the cloth bundle in his hands. "I just wanted to see him. I brought him dinner." Something in her face shifted, a flicker of discomfort. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Liu is in a meeting." Liu. The name hung strangely in the air. He had never heard Leo introduce himself that way before. "Could you tell him I'm here?" he asked, hopeful. "I won't take much of his time." She hesitated again before reaching for the phone. She murmured something, her voice hushed. Then, after a pause, she looked back up at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "He's unavailable." Mr. Lang's grip on the bundle tightened. "I can wait." A beat of silence. Then a quiet sigh. "I don't think he's expecting you," she said carefully. The meaning beneath the words was clear. Mr. Lang nodded slowly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you," he murmured, stepping back. He walked toward the exit, feeling smaller with each step. Outside, the city roared around him, indifferent, unfeeling. He stood for a moment, watching the people pass, each of them lost in their own world. Then, just as he was about to leave, he heard a familiar voice. He turned. Leo stood at the entrance, speaking to a group of well-dressed men. His laughter rang out, easy, comfortable. He looked different, his posture straighter, his face sharper. Gone were the worn-out clothes, the nervous boy who once held his hand while crossing the street. In his place was someone Mr. Lang barely recognized. Heart pounding, he stepped forward. "Leo." The name left his lips before he could stop himself. For a brief moment, Leo's head turned, his eyes landing on him. Recognition flickered. Then, something else. A hesitation. A choice. Leo turned back to his colleagues, his smile unwavering, his voice smooth as he continued speaking, as if he had never heard the old man calling his name. Mr. Lang stood frozen, the bustling world moving around him, the warmth of the meal in his hands now feeling unbearably heavy. A part of him had always known this moment would come. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. The days following that encounter felt heavier than the years of hardship Mr. Lang had endured. The weight of rejection settled deep in his bones, pressing down on him as he moved through the motions of his daily life. The streets were the same, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete and simmering street food, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer walked with the quiet hope of seeing Leo again. That hope had died the moment his son had turned away. Still, he clung to routine. He rose before dawn, pushed his cart through the alleyways, and gathered scraps with the same careful hands that had once held a child close. He worked through the cold, through the rain, through the aching loneliness that gnawed at his heart. But the world, it seemed, had grown even crueler. It started with whispers, the kind that slithered between the cracks of conversation, words laced with pity and contempt. "Did you hear? His son made it big. Works for one of those rich companies now. And yet look at him. Still digging through trash. If my son had a job like that, I wouldn't be living like this." The words found him in every corner of the neighborhood. They stung more than he cared to admit, not because they were spoken with malice, but because they were spoken with truth. The boy he had raised, the boy he had sacrificed everything for, had found success, and in doing so, had erased the past they shared. Pride and shame warred within him. He had always wanted Leo to rise above the life they lived, to break free from the cycle of poverty. And he had. But in doing so, he had severed the very roots that had nurtured him. Mr. Lang told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he had done his duty as a father, and that was enough. But loneliness is a cruel thing. One evening, as he sat outside his tiny shack, staring at the flickering flame of a single candle, a knock came at the door. It was rare for anyone to visit. His heart leapt, foolish hope flaring to life before he could smother it. But when he opened the door, it wasn't Leo. It was a man in a dark suit, his eyes sharp and calculating. Behind him stood another, equally cold in demeanor. Mr. Lang. The man's voice was smooth, too polite to be genuine. He nodded slowly. Yes. The man offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We're here on behalf of your son, Leo. At the mention of his name, something inside Mr. Lang stirred. Is he all right? Oh, quite. In fact, he's doing exceptionally well. The man stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. Which is why we're here. A chill crept up Mr. Lang's spine. We understand that you are connected to him, the man continued, his words careful, precise. But Leo is in a different place now. A different world. One that doesn't quite align with. He glanced around at the shack, at the meager belongings stacked neatly in the corner. This. Mr. Lang's hands curled into fists at his sides. What are you saying? The second man, who had remained silent until now, spoke with blunt finality. He doesn't want to be associated with you. The words sliced through him. A sharp breath, an attempt to steady himself. I am his father. The first man nodded, as if he had expected this resistance. Of course. And that's precisely why we're here, to ensure you're taken care of. We can arrange something for you, a sum of money perhaps, enough to live comfortably. In return, you would agree to disappear. The world seemed to tilt. Disappear. The word tasted foreign in his mouth. The man's smile returned, thin and practiced. Not in the literal sense, of course. Just keep your distance. No calls, no visit. A clean break. A transaction. That was what he had become. A loose end to be tied up. For the first time in his life, rage coiled within him, hot and pulsing. Not because of the money, not because of the insult, but because Leo had not come himself. He had sent strangers to discard the man who had once given up everything for him. Mr. Lang lifted his chin, his voice quiet but steady. Tell my son, he exhaled, forcing the tremble from his breath. Tell him I will not take a cent of his money. If he wishes to erase me, let him do it with his own hands. For a brief moment the men hesitated. Then, with a small nod, the first man tucked something into his coat pocket, a sealed envelope, thick with what was undoubtedly cash. We'll relay your message, he said, turning on his heel. They left without another word, their polished shoes clicking against the uneven ground. Mr. Lang watched them go, his heart heavy but unyielding. That night, as the candle flickered and the walls of the tiny shack closed in around him, he allowed himself, for the first time in a long while, to grieve. Not for himself, but for the boy who had once called him father. The seasons changed, but Mr. Lang remained the same, walking the same streets, pushing the same cart, carrying the same quiet sorrow in his heart. He had no bitterness left to feel, no anger left to burn. There was only the dull acceptance that time had moved on, and he had been left behind. He no longer looked for Leo in the faces of young men passing by. He no longer paused outside office buildings, hoping for a glimpse of the boy he had raised. He had let go. Until the day the cars arrived. It was early morning when the first one rolled in, sleek, black, with tinted windows that hid the eyes of the driver. Then another. And another. By the time the 10th luxury car came to a stop, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring in hushed voices, their eyes flickering between the gleaming vehicles and the frail old man who stood frozen at his doorstep. Mr. Lang's hands trembled as the door of the leading car opened. And out stepped Leo. Not the boy he remembered. Not the man he had last seen in that towering office building, cold and distant. This Leo looked different, his expensive suit slightly disheveled, his eyes shadowed with something deeper than exhaustion. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing between them. Then, without warning, Leo dropped to his knees. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. But Mr. Lang heard nothing, saw nothing, except for the son he had once loved more than life itself, bowing before him, his forehead touching the dust-covered ground. "I was wrong," Leo's voice cracked, breaking under the weight of his words. "I was a fool." Mr. Lang's breath hitched. Leo lifted his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I let pride blind me. I let ambition make me forget the man who gave me everything." His voice trembled. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I beg for it anyway." Silence stretched between them, thick with emotion. Then, slowly, Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. With shaking hands, he unfolded it and held it up for Mr. Lang to see. It was an old receipt, its ink faded with time. A simple purchase, one small bowl of rice bought 2 decades ago. "I found this," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. "It was at the bottom of an old box. The night you took me in, when I had nothing, you spent your last coin to feed me." His hands trembled. "And I repaid you by turning my back." A single tear traced down Mr. Lang's cheek. "I sent those men to make you disappear," Leo admitted, his voice thick with shame. "And yet you never did. You stayed. You never took the money. You never cursed my name." His hands clenched into fists. "I built a life on the foundation of your sacrifices, and I repaid you with silence." The street was utterly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, Mr. Lang took a step forward. Then another. Until he stood directly before the son who had once been his world. For a long moment, he simply looked at him. Then, with the gentleness of a man who had known nothing but love, he knelt and placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You were lost," Mr. Lang said softly. "But you have found your way back." A broken sob tore from Leo's throat as he collapsed into his father's embrace, gripping him as though he would never let go again. And this time, he wouldn't. The world around them faded, swallowed by the quiet hum of the moment. Leo clung to his father, the weight of his mistakes pressing against him like an unbearable burden. But in Mr. Lang's embrace, there was no resentment, no coldness, only warmth, only love. The crowd, drawn in by the spectacle of wealth and repentance, slowly began to disperse. Whispers faded into the air, and soon, only the two of them remained. Leo, once a man who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar deals, now knelt before the only person whose approval had ever truly mattered. For the first time in years, he felt small again. Mr. Lang's hands, calloused and worn from years of labor, gently patted Leo's back. "Come inside," he said softly. Leo swallowed hard, nodding, before rising to his feet. He cast a glance at the fleet of luxury cars lined along the street, a glaring contrast to the tiny, weathered home in front of him. With a quiet exhale, he turned to his driver and murmured, "Leave them." The cars pulled away, disappearing into the distance, leaving behind only a man and his father. Stepping into the shack, Leo felt time collapse around him. The tiny space hadn't changed, the same wooden chair, the same flickering candle, the same scent of home. Everything was smaller than he remembered, but it was here, in this modest space, that he had once known true happiness. Mr. Lang moved slowly, pouring tea into 2 mismatched cups. Leo watched, throat tightening at the familiar routine. "I don't deserve this," Leo murmured. Mr. Lang set a cup before him and sat down. "Perhaps not." His voice was gentle. "But love isn't about deserving." Leo stared down at the tea, his hands trembling. "I let them convince me that you were a burden, that you didn't belong in the life I was building." His voice cracked. "But the truth is, without you, I had nothing." Mr. Lang sipped his tea, nodding slowly. "People lose their way, Leo. It is not the falling that matters. It is the return. Leo clenched his fist. I hurt you. Yes, Mr. Lang admitted. Leo's head hung low. But, Mr. Lang continued, you came back. A deep breath shuddered through Leo. He lifted his gaze, searching his father's face for something. Punishment, condemnation, anything that would match the guilt that ate away at him. But all he found was understanding. Tears welled in his eyes. I want to make things right. Mr. Lang's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Then start by eating. He nudged a small bowl toward him. You are too thin. A choked laugh escaped Leo as he wiped at his eyes. He picked up the spoon, the warmth of the meal sinking into his palms like a forgotten memory. For the first time in years, he felt whole. In the weeks that followed, Leo made good on his promise. He didn't try to repay his father with money. Mr. Lang wouldn't have accepted it anyway. Instead, he rebuilt the home, not into something grand or extravagant, but sturdy, warm, and safe. But more than that, he stayed. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because he had found something far more valuable than wealth. He had found his father again. And in doing so, he had found himself.